we'll see. We'll see if I did it right this time, so I don't have to lose you all like I did last week. Oh, it's so embarrassing when you can't get some of this stuff to work and when you think you know what you're doing. But I keep saying I'm a forms program. I'm not a techie, right? Okay, let's go for the sharing screen and let's see what we can find out here. Okay. Ah, it's not sharing. Oh fiddle. Oh fiddle. What in the world? Ah, I see Robin. I don't see anybody else though. Okay, where are the rest of you? Oh my
I
goodness.
see you.
Yeah, but where are the rest of them? We got some others. Where are you? Where are you? Oh, terrible, terrible. Robin, I'm Robin. Mercy, mercy, mercy. Carla, can you hear me, darling? I was Carla. Carla, can you hear me? Let's see what happens. Well, there you all are, but it's not letting me share.
Carla says yes.
With me. Yeah, Carla's chatting with me. I lost the chat box, Carla. Carla doesn't have that the microphone on her computer. Okay. All right, now I see you all. Now let's see if, yeah, I remembered you have no microphone now, honey. So let me see if I can share again. Oh, okay. Okay. I haven't lost you totally. Okay, let's go in here. Robin, I see you. I still don't see Carla, right? That is the weirdest thing. Okay, let's see. Well, you all have just given me a heart attack. Somebody's in the Debbie Panis room, and Debbie Panis died about 8 years ago. And I'm going, oh, Debbie Panis. So I guess somebody's trying to log in the Debbie Panis room. Oh, that I can't tell you that that really shook me. Oh, hi, Guy. How are you? Glad to see you now that I'm over my heart attack. I thought we'd had a resurrection here. Okay, I think what I'm going to do, hold on a minute. I'm going to see if I can bring you up. This is just not right. I want to share. Okay, now I've got Debbie Panis room and I've lost Debbie, right? I mean, Robin.
Really? I'm here? You don't see me?
Oh, I don't see you. Oh, well, maybe y'all are there and I just don't see you. Is anybody else there? Robin, now I see you.
Debbie Panis room and I are on camera.
Okay. I do not, excuse me, I do not see Debbie Panis room. As long as y'all are there, I don't mind not seeing you. I just want to know if you're there or not. Okay. Okay. All right. Now can you, goodness, can you see the screen with the checklist on it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes. Maybe we're in business after all. Okay. All
Jonathan
right.
in Debbie Panis room. Jonathan.
Okay. So hopefully, okay. All right. Now I'm gonna switch from that one because I need to go through this one first. Okay. Can you see buyer questionnaire? Do you see buyer questionnaire? Shake your head. Yes. Okay. Oh my goodness, this shouldn't be so hard, my land sakes alive. Again, like I told you last week, it has to do with what Microsoft is trying to get me off of Chrome, and Chrome works much better for this. And so that Edge is really interfering with our Zoom presentations. Okay. Today, we're going to be talking about the North Carolina buyer forms. And one of the first things I want to impress on y'all please, please do everything you can to set up a buyer consultation before you go out and show properties. I know a lot of times the buyer only wants to see the property. They could care less about what you have to legally do, but it'll save you time and save them time in the long run if you can get them into the office or get them at Starbucks or somewhere where you can go through what we call a buyer consultation. It gets you all on the same page. It puts you in the leadership of this operation that you're getting ready to go into. You don't want to be in a situation where the buyer is jerking you around, okay? You want to take leadership, and I'm not saying control, I said leadership. And this is a simple little form. You may or may not use this form. You may have several other forms. Your coaches may show you one. You can get other forms on KW Command. But this is just I basically wanted to put this in front of you. And again, I'll be glad to send any of these to you all if you want them. This is some questions for you to ask. You don't necessarily have to sit there with a piece of paper in your hand, but these are the questions, some questions that you want to start your consultation with, okay? There's another even simpler form that I like to use. It's what are the 5 things that are most important to you about this transaction? So you write down those 5 things, and while you're talking to them, write them down so they know you're paying attention, okay? So either form that you choose to use, just know the questions that you want to get answers to when you do have a chance to talk to them. Sometimes you'll only have 10 or 15 minutes, but you know in that 10 or 15 minutes, you've got to earn their trust. You've got to go through the working with real estate agents disclosure with them. But the important thing is you know where to start working with them. So the buyer consultation is really critical, I think, in your representation of a buyer. I'm not going to go through it because, again, it's just an example for you so that you are aware of the need for it. Okay. Now, the next page that I have for you, obviously, I'm not going to go through it because we went through it last week with the working through disclosure, and you know what the disclosure is, but remember, and I want to press upon you again, this is your disclosure to the buyer, prospective client, of how you represent Keller Williams Ballentine. It is not a disclosure for anybody else. It's not for you to ask them what they want. This is for you to say to them, agents at Keller Williams Ballentine represent people who are wanting to buy houses in these ways. And you want to check, as you can see right here, it says check, all that apply. And at Keller Williams Ballentine, we do the buyer agency, we do dual agency, which the firm is the dual agent, and we can do an individual dual agent. Most often when it's an individual dual agent, you go into what's called designated agency, so that one agent represents the client, the buyer, and another agent represents the seller. Then down here, unrepresented buyer. Obviously, we're not representing them because you were going to give them just a little hint as an unrepresented buyer that they would need to be cautious as they're revealing the things that are motivational to them or the things that could be confidential and hurt their negotiations. That's about all. You might expand just a little bit. They might have a question on it. The important thing is that you help them to understand this form is not a contract. This is our disclosure to you, Mr. Buyer, of how we work with buyers at Keller Williams Ballentine. You come down here, you get their signature, then you're going to sign it, put your license number and the firm name. Tuck that away. I really think that you might want to, in your command opportunities, you might want just to set up an opportunity that's titled Working with Real Estate Agents Disclosures. And if you don't start a new file, go any further this with the person you've disclosed it to, put it in there, because one of the things that the commission likes to do is they like to see if there are people actually doing the work of the real estate disclosure, even though they don't have a buyer agency agreement or don't go any further. So if we get audited and have to have those, I'm going to have you all make sure that I have availability to get those. Now, this is a form. This is the one that I told you I just corrected. And you'll know it's the current one because right down here, we see it says, if either party fails to complete settlement closing within 7 days, not 14. So if you all are using this particular diagram, this form, make sure that you have the current one, okay? And we're going to send that out again. I'll post it and make sure that it's in the right spot so you can get the updated one. It's in a publisher file, and I think the publisher didn't come into the area where I thought it was going to, but nevertheless, you need to have a real good grasp of our contract, our due diligence contract. The due diligence contracts, even though South Carolina now has what they call a strict due diligence contract, it is still different from our due diligence contract. There are 7 or 8, maybe 9 other states who have due diligence in their contract. But again, they're different. So when you start talking to someone about due diligence and you start talking to them about getting ready to write an offer on a property, it's vital for you as an agent to know where you're going. You need to know the path. You're the leader. You need to know what's the next step. They may not want you to say this is the next step, but you again are going to position your conversation so that you can guide them. I think this is a real good broad overview. We have several of these because you know how visual I am, and but I think this has been one we've kind of worked through now for several years. This particular one, because of the way I had to reorganize things, you'll see we have the logo for Keller Williams Valentine up here on the left. You're going to know it's the new one when you see the logo up here on the left and not down here. Our previous one had the logo down here. So you quickly know that this is the updated version of it, all right, without having to look for the 7 down here. In the phase 1, you got the phase 2, and you got the phase 3. So as you're going through these different phases, it's helpful for many buyers to see where they're going, all right, rather than waiting on you to verbally tell them where they're going. Yes, they need that too, but there are those who the flyer really does help. Now, another flyer you want to use is this one, the due diligence and how it affects you. Knowing, I don't know if you saw it, just I think the other day somebody was on Facebook saying I've lost my flyer. I need to see it again, or have one of these to be able to share with clients. Those that do not quite understand the due diligence concept, you have to have different mediums that you're going to use to help them to grasp how important it is during the due diligence period to get done what they need to get done. I think you may remember that one of the things in the most recent the offer to purchase, they have added now the special assessments as a responsibility of a buyer during the due diligence period. And we're going to touch on that in just a minute, but I just was thinking of how many things that have to be done during the due diligence period. And sometimes when people think they've got a contract on the house, they're so excited about getting the house, they don't realize that there are things that a buyer must do. Of course, they're doing it with your help and your guidance, but they must get it done. And there is a period of time in which it must be done. So this little diagram, Joshua Hung did this for us some time ago. And again, it's just a different way of saying there is a period of time that you buy the right to terminate the contract for any or no reason. That's all that money is for. The money is for the right to terminate the contract for any or no reason. During that period of time that you have bought the right to terminate for any or no reason, you are going to see that, make sure that the buyer is going to do all the things that need to be done during due diligence. The way they're going to know if they want to buy that house is to know as much about that house as they can know. And that involves inspections. It initially involves the general home inspection. You know, that's the first thing it involves. Then beyond the general home inspection, don't let anybody buy a house without a termite inspection. Please don't let anybody buy a house in this area without a termite inspection. You hear me? It's only $75 or $95. Make sure they don't go into a house with termites, okay? Make sure if there is a termite bond. It may be that the bond can be transferred. So that's just one of the things that you want to look for doing due diligence. We're going to go through all the things as we go through the contract. I'll show you all the things that they need to go through with. But right now, in fact, let me show back up on this the form that we just looked at. Look right up here. See all that list of things right there? That's a real good list. All those things are the things that they've got to do during this period of time, called due diligence, okay? The due diligence period is normally for 14 to 21 days. That is not during the market that we're in right now, although it looks like we're headed back into a little bit more balanced market. You would like to have 14 to 21 days, but it's closer to the 14 right now, isn't it? You want to, again, it's another way of looking at when the earnest money is paid, who the due diligence is paid to, when is it paid, and hopefully this will be a good flyer for you to be able to use. Now, obviously, the first and foremost thing that you want to get done, other than educate the buyer a little bit and disclose to them how you work, the goal is to get your employment agreement. Your employment agreement is this exclusive buyer agency agreement. This is them saying, yes, I want you to represent me or us exclusively. And in the exclusive buyer agency agreement, and we're going to go a little bit more in detail on the agency discussion, but by and large, this is what gives you the right to write the contract, and it gives you the right to be paid for executing the contract. You are not ever to write a contract unless you know who you represent. And in order to represent the buyer with whom you're working, you have to have this buyer agency agreement. All right. Now, on this form, you can see here that the, where's my thing? There it is. The buyer agency agreement is between the buyer's name and look here, it's with the firm. This is the firm. It is not you as an individual. It's not Keller Williams Ballantyne area Robin Palmer. You don't need to put an individual's name. It's the firm's name that goes there. And the hardest thing is for some of our teams not to want to put their names in it. No, it's not for the team. It's with the firm. It clearly states it in black and white. Of course, I got to tell you, some people don't read what they're writing, right? I read what the form they're filling out. Take a note right here. Anytime you see something in the blue box, it's a note. It's a reminder. If it's in a red box, it's a warning. But in the blue box, it's basically a reminder for you to think about. If you have an LLC or a trust, it could be a corporation buying. Yesterday, one of the girls called me, and it was a church wanting to buy some property, and but behind the church name, there was an LLC. So we kind of have to dissect it a little bit and find out who has the right to make an offer? Who is the person who actually can sign on behalf of that? In that case, it was an LLC. So up here, if it is an LLC, you would say ABC LLC, whatever the name of the LLC is, by, and a person's name, comma. If it's an LLC, it's most likely going to be a manager. If it's a trust, you spell out the long name of the trust, by the person's name, trustee. So it's the name of whoever's buying it by whoever has the authority to sign for that person. And when you're trying to find out about an LLC or corporation, you would be able to find that information on SOSNC, Secretary of State in North Carolina, SOSNC.gov. So you can look up the name of a business, an LLC. You will not find a trust there, and you will not find an estate there. If it is an estate, you rarely going to see an estate buying something. Okay, yeah, that's normally the seller, and we talked about that last week. But a trust, you will possibly find that somebody's buying it, and again, they do not record. Typically, do not record a trust or an estate. So the only way you can find it out is to ask the person who is doing the business with you to show you, to give you something in writing, because you're going to have it for the attorney. So, but you're really kind of taking the scenario and knowing whether or not you should take any more time with this person if they aren't the ones who has the authority to sign for it. Now this little section right here, you know my feeling about this one. I'm so strong about this little paragraph that's bold. I almost want to have in fact, when I'm doing it, I put me a little box right out here for initials. I want proof that the buyer says, I did disclose to them, not only the working real estate agents, but I asked them if they were working with somebody else. I asked them if they not only working, do they have a written agreement, employment agreement, any written agreement of working with somebody else. And they are always so innocent, and they look at you with full confidence and say, no, oh no, I haven't signed it. No, that's the first thing you get. Kind of like the little kid that has chocolate all over his mouth, and he says, no, I haven't been in the cookie jar, but there's evidence everywhere. So you, as the knowledgeable person that you are, you say, well, have you made any offers on any other properties? Ding, ding, ding. They said, well, yeah, we were working with someone about 3 days ago. No, 3 months ago, but we didn't like them and they couldn't get the offer through. And so, no, we're not working with them anymore. What should that say to you as a buyer's rep? They could not have made an offer if they did not have a buyer agency agreement. Buyers think that if they don't get the deal, if they don't get the contract, that none of the paperwork is valid anymore. Yes, the buyer's agency continues to be valid. So you stop right then and have a discussion with them about the fact that unless they have a termination with the other company that says they don't have an agency relationship, you cannot continue to work with them, because if you do, you are going to obligate them to a second commission, and you don't want to do that to them. Say, I'm just not the kind of person that I'm going to obligate you to obligate them to commissions. And I've just been on the phone today with a BIC where this happened to one of our agents, where another agent swooped in and got them under contract. And now my agent is saying, well, I should be paid because I did 8 different offers for them. And so, I mean, it can really get hairy. So all that. Now I'm not going to fuss anymore about that. Do you understand how important that paragraph is? What, honey?
Should we ask to see the termination?
You bet
letter?
you should. You bet you should. You say, once you
Uh-oh.
find out and you know, see, that's an Article 16 violation of the Code of Ethics, first of all. So you could be taken to the board on an ethics charge in addition to a conflict of not getting paid. So you definitely want to ask them if you had the discussion and they've admitted and they know that they've been working with somebody else. Say, even if it's an email, I don't care for just an email, but that's better than nothing. And so you definitely want to have something in writing, whether it's an email or preferably the form that we use is termination of agency. You do not give them that form. They need to contact the BIC of the other firm and work it out with that firm. You don't give them the form, but you know that you need to see the termination of agency or an email. Okay, I'm gonna skip over some of this because I want to really get to the offer to purchase, but I want to highlight a few things for you. As you know, in 2 hours, we can't possibly cover all the forms that we need to cover. Also know that if you're going to have any type of an agreement or contract, you have to have a beginning date and an end date. So the beginning date in this situation is going to be right here. It begins on, and typically it's the day you're writing it for a buyer's agency. It's going to start today, and it will end on one of these two blanks. If this person is buying a primary home or maybe one home, then you're going to put a date here because it says to purchase a single property. A few years ago, they expanded this option for buyers who are buying more than one property, so that if you're working with like an investor, you're working with someone who's buying multiple properties, you don't have to go back and do the buyer agency agreement all over. You check this box right here. And on this one, I'd probably go out a year, maybe even 2 years, but at least a year. Whereas in this situation, you might not have them under contract but 3 or 4 months. Most of the time you can get buyers settled during that time on a single property. So you've got a beginning date and you've got an end date, whether it's single or multiple offers. The compensation, as you know, it's become a real booger right now, for lack of a better word, because of so many of the lawsuits that are swirling around from National Association of Realtors and the Department of Justice, where I believe there's 4 of them, if I'm not mistaken, 2 primary ones, but I think there's 4, where buyers are saying they got overcharged sellers are saying they got overcharged for paying for buyers' services. And so the Department of Justice has taken on the National Association of Realtors in lawsuits, and they're still in process. They thought they had it agreed upon, and then the Department of Justice pulled back and said, no, we're not going to follow what we told you before we were going to do. And so the buyer's agency commission right now is very much up in the air for since 96, I think it was when buyer's agency came into being in our area. From that point on, we have been able to count on if a commission was 6%, if the seller was going to pay 6%, which most of the time they did, and all over the country, then that listing agent split the amount that they were getting paid with the buyer agency. And so it was 6 and 3 for, probably 30 something years. And now you are seeing buyer's agency amounts all over the board. You're going to see, so help me if I didn't see the other day, $1. I thought I was going to throw up. $1 as a buyer agent. I said, why did you even bother? Why did you even, well, he had to put something in the blank is what he told me. But anyway, you're going to see percentages that will possibly go from 0.5% up to 3, or maybe even 3.5% buyer's agency agreements. or you're going to see a builder who is going to offer 3%, that's 3%, $3,000, like Ryan Holmes, or 4,000, or 1,500 if it's an investor. Or you're going to see Taylor Morrison offer $7,500, and the house you should have gotten somewhere around $17,000. Or I shouldn't say should have. You had a right to expect it because you were anticipating 3%. So that discussion leads me into this thing right here. How much does the firm expect, or how much do you expect to get paid on a transaction for this buyer? Before I answer that question, look right here. Do not put anything in this non-refundable retainer. We don't take any non-refundable retainers. It's just not, it's really not done in our area. It's not acceptable. The only time that you might consider that would be if you're working with a rental and they're driving you all over the country and you may decide that you want some gas money, but talk to me about it before. But right here on this line, I don't have a problem with you putting 3% or maybe 2%. We most often will take, if you're anticipating 3% or thinking the firm wants 3%, you can put 3% there. But let's look right here. These are some of the qualifiers on that amount. The firm shall seek the fee from a cooperating listing firm. That's through the MLS. So this little section here has to do with when a listing, a firm, listing agent puts a listing in MLS, and you're down the bottom of the page, you see the words SA and BA. You're going to see most often BA. Right now, I'm seeing most often 2.5%. I don't know what you're seeing. And SA, by the way, is not the selling agent. SA is the sub agent, and that should be a 0 if it's our listings, because you're not going to be a sub agent for another firm. So the BA, if it says 2.5 in MLS and you've got 3% here, you have the right to go and ask the buyer to pay the additional 0.5%. But as a firm, we typically don't insist that you do that. We're not going to go after the buyer for the extra 0.5%. It's just not financially feasible to do that, quite honestly. And it's bad will in the community. So we typically are not going to do it. However, if you want to ask the other firm to make up the difference, the other firm has a right to say yes or no. Right here, this section right here, right over to the left. Oh no, if you got a form out there, you write form 220. And while you're writing, right down here, form 770. And I'm going to explain it to you. 220 is a form that you use between firms. And if, let's say, a firm has offered 2% on the property that your buyer decides to buy, and your buyer is not willing to pay you anything over and above that 2%, or maybe they can't financially do it. If you can't make up the difference in that 2% and the 3% up here that you were expecting, what you want to do is use 220. You're going to fill it out and give 220 to the other firm with the offer and request 2.5% if that's what you're willing to take. So that form 220 is a form that's used between firms, okay? It is not a form that's used with your client, although quite honestly on that form 220, if I do ask the other firm to make up a 0.5% or a whole percent, I do think that it's good for the buyer and the seller to sign. On the form it says optional, but I honestly think it's again, it's in the full disclosure that the buyer and the seller need to know that there is being a change, or that the other firm said, no, we're not going to, because obviously they have to follow the dictate of the seller too. So all that to say on that Form 220, can take a look at it sometime out of class and look at it and see how you could use that. We recently, in fact, yesterday, had one of the agents did the 220, and because it was a sizable commission, she was willing to give up, I can't remember, that was 2,500, I think. She was willing to give up. So you would use the same 220 form to say that she was willing to give it up, because it made a difference in whether or not the buyer and the seller could come together on the final price. And so she had to put it in writing that she was willing to give up $2,500. Now, if you have that Form 220, we still need a concession letter to go to the attorney. You can do the 220 and you can send it to me and I can sign it, showing that we as a firm agree to it, or we can do the concession letter, which is the most common way that we show that we are taking less than what we had been offered in MLS. Now, this little next section, the 770, that is only between you and your client. Remember, you're representing a buyer. And if for whatever reason you get more commission, let's say you got a bonus. Let's say, wouldn't that be wonderful? You don't get bonuses right now, do you? But let's say you did. You would have to disclose to your buyer that you were getting a bonus in addition to whatever amount you had right here. If you had, let's say you decided, well, I'll just go ahead and put it 2.5, because so many of them are 2.5. But you found this wonderful property with a listing agent that's sharing 3%. Then you have to use 770 and disclose to your buyer that you're getting 3%. Okay. That form is only between you and your client. It has nothing to do with compensation otherwise. Okay. So let's scooch on down here now. Oh, look at this right here. Oh, wait a minute. I need to show you something. This blank right here. This blank is what's called the protection period. After your buyer agency expires, or for whatever reason we terminate it, if they try to buy the property from one of the sellers that you showed properties to, then you are still entitled to be paid. However, if they sign another buyer agency agreement, you are not entitled. But it's just a kind of a deterrent, and to help buyers to understand they cannot use you for 3 months and your gas and your knowledge, and then go back to that FSBO or go back to another listing and buy the house. That is not a real strong argument. I got to tell you, it doesn't hold up too very far, but it's at least it's you being able to set a boundary, and the buyers, unless they're boundary bashers, can respect that. Okay. Down here, other potential buyers. It's very common for us as a firm to have multiple people making offers on the same house, or we could represent multiple buyers. We're not exclusive to that buyer in the exclusion of other buyers. So that's the paragraph there. They've reworked the firm duties. They've simplified the list of firm duties. So, and I kind of think it's nice because they have organized the format to go along basically with the fiduciary duties, because our old CAR, remember the acronym that you used, learned in pre-licensing, the confidentiality and the loyalty, the accounting, those fiduciary duties are said in a very user-friendly or understandable way. And I think that I did a really good job on reorganizing that paragraph. This next section, look at that red box, that warning. The red box is calling your attention to the potential of fair housing violations. And I know we talked about this, and I think all of y'all were on the call last week. We we talked at length about the fair housing violations that can happen. They can happen in love letters. We're not going to be party to the potential fair housing violation, nor are we going to be the ones who will determine if the fair housing is being violated in the letter. You are not an attorney, and you can't pick up that letter and say, well, I don't see any fair housing violations in there. No, 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 no. We're just not going to deal with love letters, all right? If the buyer wants to put it in the seller's mailbox, that's up to them. But we will not be conveying a love letter as part of the offer, because it can't be part of the offer. So you want to have that discussion with them. And in, I think in one of the agreements, they even have to sign, like the listing agreement. I don't know why they don't have the initial in the buyer's agency agreement, but for whatever reason they don't. This is the buyer's duties to work with you exclusively. You're not going to be they are agreeing that they're not going to be working with other agents. So again, that's a violation and breach of this contract if they start working with somebody else. Okay. Come down here and look this change. Those of you who've been in the business longer than about 3 months know that for years, I mean, I can't even remember an agency agreement that didn't have 3 boxes. Looky here, you got 2 boxes here. The buyer acknowledges receipt of a sample copy of the offer to purchase, or the buyer acknowledges receipt of a sample copy of the professional services disclosure. And remember, there was the 3rd box, questions and answers on home inspections. I do not know. Nobody is saying why they took that box off. I think that box is really, I think the material is really good to pass on to your buyer and or your seller. I guess they've taken away the buyer's or the agent's responsibility of getting that information to them. But I have a feeling it has something to do between the home inspector board and the real estate board. Whatever it is, we are no longer required to present that to them, but I would highly recommend that you provide it to them. Again, you're going to provide these 2 documents. Now, let me show you. I'm going to scooch on down here and take a look. You see where that watermark is on the offer to purchase? That watermark must be on any form that you give to someone who's not a realtor, okay? The forms are only to be used by North Carolina realtors who have the right to use them. And so when you give one of these to a party, such as someone prospective buyer, it must have the watermark, or if you don't have one that has the watermark on it, just write the word sample across the top of the page. Anything that's going to prevent them from using the blank copy. Last week, one of my top producers called me. She said, I just want you to hear you say it. I know it, but you said I can't give this form to a for sale by owner to use, right? I said, right, you are right. You are not to give that form unless it has the word sample on it. And she said, well, I did show him the sample, but he wants one without the word. No, he can't have it. Okay, so you've got the offer to purchase sample, and then you've got the professional services. Come on down. This is a real good time when you go, when you get to this spot and you tell them that you want them to initial that you've given it to them. The professional services disclosure and election is a worksheet. It's like it's one of those living organisms. You don't do it one time and you're done with it. Throughout the whole process, you're going to be working your process of working your offer. You're going to be using this professional services disclosure. Initially, you're going to start with a few inspections. And again, you can show the buyer, these are some of the inspections that are the most common. And as the most common, obviously, they will make their choices. They can either waive it right here. They can waive it if they don't want, and heaven forbid, but they say, well, I don't want a termite inspection. Maybe they say, well, there's a termite bond on the property. Why do I need a termite inspection? They can waive it, all right? Or they can select to have it. And when they select to get it, they initial that, then they want to, between the two of you or three of you, you decide who's going to order it. Then you might decide who you wanted to order it for if the buyer has a choice. So you definitely want to point out to them that they are going to work with you on these inspections. You're not going to leave them totally out there, nor are you going to be totally responsible for them. All right. So it's a real good time to point out the professional services disclosure and election. Don't forget that part. One of the things I wanted to pull your attention to on the professional services disclosure and election form is you can see there's some extra blanks. I think because we have a title company, we're working on some new disclosure forms, but I'm going to show you one of the disclosure forms today. On the professional services disclosure, not the sample, but this is a good time to start talking to them about it. They will have the option to choose a title insurance company. They need to know about title insurance, and what they don't know about title insurance. If you want to be able to share some documents, Robin was she emailed me the other day, and I sent her out some information on title insurance. I've got some more information to share with you too. The difference in title insurance and homeowners insurance. You know, most people have the foggiest clue what title insurance is, if they even have it, or if they've ever had it. So if I were you, I would probably want to bring up the topic, as early on as you can about title insurance, and you may want to just handwrite it in there or write it in. And again, I'm going to show you the disclosures in just a few minutes. Another thing I want you to start talking about really early on is this right here, the attorney. The buyer, according to our contract, has a right to choose the attorney. And you obviously will have some influence with most buyers who say, well, I don't have a real estate attorney. I might have a divorce attorney, or I might have another attorney, but I don't have a real estate attorney. So you want to start talking to them about the necessity of their choosing an attorney, because they have to deposit the earnest money with an attorney. And that has to be done within 5 days of the effective date of the contract. So you don't want to get to the place that you're writing the contract and saying, okay, what attorney do you want to use? Although right now things are happening so fast, that's about what most of us are doing. But your professional services sample is a good place to start bringing up the concept that they will be choosing an attorney for their earnest money. You don't have to spend a lot of time, but again, just to be aware of it. Now, let me scooch back up here. And I wanted to, there was a couple other things I wanted to point out to you on the buyer's agency agreement. Now, come on up there. Let's see. There we go. A home warranty. We do not take a fee for arranging a home warranty for a buyer, whether they are buying it or we're buying it for them. That's not an unusual gift for an agent to give to a client. But we don't take a fee for that. And so in this blank right here, that's going to be an NA or none, because we do not take it. There's been so many violations with RESPA, and RESPA has come after so many, particularly large firms. They come after you with a vengeance, saying that that you are not to be paid for that. So our company years ago opted not to take that little $75, although at one time it sure did feel good to have a $75 check to buy some gas with, but nevertheless, we don't do it. Confidentiality of the offers. Obviously, the offers are to be kept confidential, and you are not to disclose to anyone what an offer is. And if you get the offer through, you are not to disclose what the contract price was until the property closes and it becomes public knowledge. So just make sure that you are not the one that's going to be violating that confidentiality. Okay. Now we're now down to, oh, look here, additional provisions. About the only thing that you're going to put in additional provisions would be that the buyer is related to the agent, a buyer's agent. or the buyer is the agent. All right. Because remember, when you buy a property for yourself, you have to do the same paperwork as you would do if you were representing someone else. Who is the agency agreement with? The firm, right? So you are representing yourself in a relationship with the firm. So you are responsible for all the paperwork that you would do for another buyer if it's yourself. I know that seems kind of redundant, but that's the rules. Okay. Dual agency. They've done a really nice job. We didn't have very many changes to our forms this year, but they did do some format, rearranging some paragraphs and combining some concepts in the contracts. And I think they've done a very nice job of explaining the dual agency and the designated agency much better than our forms have been in the past. This is the new format. This is the way it looks now. It's very clear that the only way someone can have designated agency is to give the authority for dual agency. There is no designated unless the firm can be dual. All right. So they've simplified it and hopefully clarified that if the buyer will allow dual agency, which you anticipate is in their best interest for the firm to be dual agents, then they are to check the initial here, and then right here, the buyer does or does not authorize the same individual agent to represent both the buyer and the seller. If they don't want that, the alternative would be designated dual agency, and that's where they can initial here. If they say no here, then this is the option for them to be able to work or to be able to buy a Ballantine listing. All right. And if they don't want any type of dual agency, then they can come down here and say exclusive representation, which means nobody in the Ballantine office, Keller Williams Ballantine, can represent them. They will have to get their own agent somewhere else, or make sure that they don't buy a Ballantine listing. All right. So like I said, I think they did a really good job of simplifying this. I think you will agree. A dual agency compensation. If for whatever reason they do allow an individual dual agent, and that one person should be able to have the dual agency full fee. Most of the time when buyers are going to want you to work with them as a listing agent, they're wanting to save the X number of dollars, whether it's 3% or 2%, they're wanting to have the benefit of that. So in the contract, you talk to them that if we were into a dual agency situation, the firm would expect the full amount, and I would say 6% there. It could be that if you are the individual agent, you can agree to give them some compensation or concession. But right now, going into it, you want to make sure they understand that the fees would be paid to the listing agent and the buyer's agent as a dual agent fee, and it would be 6%. Okay, the next section is on terminations. Read through those. Hopefully you won't have to use them, but read through them so you know what the remedies are if they try to breach or try to, for whatever reason, skirt their duties as in the buyer agency agreement. Now, don't forget to tell them about the wire fraud warning. We've got to continually stress the wire fraud warning because the FBI says we're still losing lots of money on people being able to hack into emails and get information they shouldn't be able to get. And that's obviously been very hurtful in a lot of families, a lot of situations. When you get that back to this signature page, if it's a buyer not representing an LLC or trust or whatever, then obviously you're going to print and have their signature. When you're using your forms programs, they're already set up pretty much that way. Please don't leave out the information on an agency agreement. your buyer agency or your listing agreement, make sure that we have the contact information. I prefer that you have the mailing address, but at least have the email and have the telephone number. That needs that, because that's an agreement between our firm and that party. When you are doing the offer to purchase, however, between the buyer and the seller and the two firms, make sure that you do not put all that information. And again, we'll look at that in just a minute. But on the buyer and the listing agency agreements, put the contact information so that the firm, if we need to get in touch with them, we can do so. All right. Now, right here's where I told you might have to print in, you might have to do a text in here. If it is an LLC or corporation or a trust or an estate, you're going to put it right in here. And then here's your signature block for whoever has the right to sign. When you put the buyer's information in your eForms programs, a lot of times all that information will pop out as a buyer. So you might have to go in there and manually change it from a buyer. If it is an LLC, put it down here. And then you're going to put another signature box here for the manager or the trustee, the executor, whoever, to sign. Then here's you have the printed information and the contact information here. And again, this is, of course, Keller Williams Valentine. Your firm license number is C, capital C, 13291, capital C, 13291. And on down here, you're going to put your signature, your individual license number, your North Carolina individual license number, and your contact information. Now that is your agreement to represent the buyer and your employment agreement. So now we can proceed forward. I'm not going to go any further with the stack because those are the sample forms we looked at. Now let's see if we can switch to this next section that I wanted to go over with you. Where are they? Stop share. And then we're gonna share the other stack of papers. Why isn't that coming up? Let's see. No, that's not it. Can you see them? Are we seeing them?
Just the file names.
Yeah, the checklist.
Yeah.
Ah, that's what you need. Thank you. Thank
no,
you.
We just see just the file names.
Oh, you're not seeing the
Not
checklist?
any forms.
Oh, fiddle. Okay, hold on a minute. Let's see if this one works. Do you see them now?
No, I'm still looking at like the Windows files.
Okay. Let's try again. That didn't work, did it?
No.
Okay, hang in there. Okay, there you all are. I shouldn't. Okay. Now, do you see them?
Yes.
Ah, good. Good. So this is our little in-house multicolor checklist. And again, they're different checklists. You're going to have a checklist for DocuSign. You're going to have a checklist for contract to close. I know there's an overwhelming number of checklists, and sometimes I wish we had a checklist of all the checklists for you. But find the one that helps you the most. All right. For whatever reason, some seem to help you keep you on track more so than others. This is the one that a lot of us use because it basically takes you step by step. and helps you to know which forms you are to use, which versions of the forms to use. Are there different forms for the step that you are in? One of the things I want to point out to you, this yellow section here, we are required by law, North Carolina, that when a buyer has signed, or seller has signed documents within 3 days, we are supposed to make sure they have the availability to a copy of those. And the firm is supposed to have access to those three, or those forms within 3 days. And just a reminder, when you are going to upload some documents into Command, until you hit the submit button, we don't know they're there. But I think Carla would appreciate it if you would wait until you get an offer to purchase to submit your buyer's agency agreement and you're working with real estate agents. That way she doesn't have to handle the file so many times. So if you will make sure that it's in Command within those 3 days, then if we needed to, you could submit it. We could contact you and you could submit it. But most of the time we do not submit the file for compliance or submit it. It's called submit for review until we do get the offer to purchase. And if there's never an offer to purchase, then you might want to submit it so it can be on record. The first things you obviously are going to look at are what we've talked about already. We're getting ready to talk about the offer to purchase now. The second step, all of these things on the bottom of this list and the top of this list, these are forms that you might use at different stages or different times. Some of the backup, like a backup addendum, I hope we're going to be able to take a look at that today. So if you just look and be aware of what forms you might be using and you choose the one you need. And if you will see here, I've put the form number. If you're in DocuSign, you're going to look in the library, the NCAR library of forms for the North Carolina forms, and you're going to look for either the title or the number and make sure that the copyright date is 7/2022. We only have about 2 more weeks of grace period that we can use the previous versions. So right now you want to be switching yourself over to using the current version, which is 7/2022. I did just recently, the last 2 or 3 days, become aware that when you're writing an offer to purchase right now, there is a glitch in the DocuSign documents on the offer to purchase. It's in the fuel tank section. I think it's section 7. That's a new section, and DocuSign is working on it. We are trying to get it corrected, but they didn't put the digital check boxes, so you're not able to add your check marks in there. So, but anyway, just be aware that we are working on it, and hopefully, if you're writing an offer to purchase, you know, you can do it. You can do it manually, or I understand that you can save it into the envelope and you can add a checkbox there. But anyway, just to make you aware. Obviously, when you get down to close to closing, we would like for you to have submitted everything 7 days before closing, but at least 3 days before closing. Don't wait till you close and then want to get paid that day or the next day. That's not fair to Carla, and the compliance team need the time to be able to review it and make sure that you got all your ducks in a row. Okay, so make sure that at least 3 days before closing, and preferably 7 days, that you submit that for review. And if for whatever reason, heaven forbid, you have to terminate. Oh, I just hate terminations. If you have to terminate, these are the forms that you would need to use and termination. And I think one of the next sections I'm going to do, instead of the offer to purchase, I'm going to probably show you all the different ways you have to terminate in North Carolina and South Carolina. Now, this next form is what I was mentioning to you a while ago about the title insurance. Our firm, we have a joint venture with some of our agents who have an interest in a title company, and consequently we have to disclose that we have this interest. And the way we disclose it is with this form right here. It's called affiliated business arrangement disclosure. The reason you disclose it, it has to be, it's a RESPA requirement that if there is a loan involved, you have to disclose if out of that closing service, there might be some monies gained by the firm. And so that has to be disclosed. Again, the format of this one is getting ready to change. I'm working on a new one, but I just wanted to show you and talk to you about the, it's affiliated business arrangement disclosure. But this one is about the title company. And if for whatever reason, the buyer is willing to go with the company, the title company you would recommend, this is the election form. They would agree to it, and then you would give that to the attorney along with the offer to purchase. This is often what you're going to see them check if they take your recommendation, or this right here can be checked, where it says, I request my title insurance business to be referred to. And on this line, there is such a thing as a renewal policy. They can get save considerable money by getting a renewable policy. Like let's say they had there was a policy, the seller had the policy previously, and if their policy can be assumed or transferred to the new buyer is going to save some money. So that's one of the first things you want to check out with the attorney. Is there a renewable title policy where the buyer can save some money on it? And if so, then rather than them agreeing to, or you even referring them to Heritage, it would be better for them to financially to go this route. So just a little bit more about the title insurance. Again, you're going to have the buyer's signature and date and your name here, so that you would be able to give that to the attorney. I'm not going to go through that since that one's changing. Last week, we spent considerable time on the residential property disclosure. The reason I put that first, before you start writing the contract, you're going to have your buyer's agency agreement, you're working with real estate agents, and it's highly recommended that you find that residential property disclosure. Hopefully the listing agent has attached it on the MLS listing. Remember, I just think that's great when they do. Make sure you have that residential property disclosure in that MOG. And if the house is older than 78, have the lead-based disclosure, lead-based paint disclosure. Have those disclosures in hand when you write that contract to make sure that the buyer has it. The buyer does not have to agree to anything in it. The buyer is only to sign that they have it and you've given it to them. All right. So right here, before you even go into the contract, you want to make sure they have it and make sure that the owner's name is here. The owners have signed it, and then your buyer is signing it. And you see the italicized paragraph, buyers acknowledge the receipt of a copy of this disclosure, that they have examined it before signing, that they have understood that this is not a warranty by the owners. So basically, you've got it, you have time to take a look at it. I got to tell you, they don't take the time to look at it. They want to sign that contract and buy that house. So you are the one, again, slow that pace down just a little bit and say, I want you to take a look at this as I'm preparing the documents for the offer to purchase for you to sign. It works very well when you can email it or put it in DocuSign and send it on over to them previous to them signing the agreement. I'm not going to go through that because we went through it considerably last week. There's your mineral oil and gas. It's the same pattern down here. It's the pattern only that they know that something has been sold off or something hasn't. Okay. And remember, no representation does not mean no representation on all three. No representation only applies to that sentence. You have to answer both of these sentences by these boxes. And there is no representation because the seller who gave you that knows if they've sold it out or knows if they're going to. Okay, now we're back to the offer to purchase. Oh, love this offer to purchase. I love seeing it coming through because I know y'all are having a good chance of making some money. And that's what you're in business for. You don't work for free, right? And you don't work just for the fun of it, but hope you have some fun doing it. The offer to purchase this year did not change very much, which I'm really glad that it didn't. There are 2 or 3 things I'm going to point out to you where there was a change. But the main thing right now is you need to know what's going to go happen with the due diligence fee and the earnest money. Those are the 2 biggies. And remember that flyer I showed you up front. That's a really good thing to pull out at this time when you start talking to them, if you don't have time to do it earlier, or you can maybe refer back to it. When you are writing your offer, you want to pull out, other than the disclosures, you want to see if there's a survey. Sometimes there's a survey attached. You want to print out the MLS data sheet, and you want to print out the tax records for the offer before you write your offer to purchase. Just as we talked about last week, the tax records are sometimes are verification of what you're putting in the listing. Same thing when you're writing the offer, you want to verify the data is consistent between the listing data that's in the MLS, the tax records, and what you're getting ready to write on. So you want to pull out those documents and have those handy when you're starting to write the offer to purchase. Right here, obviously the seller's name, the buyer's name, the same things apply as to whether or not it's an LLC or an estate. A lot of times in an estate here, if it's an estate selling this, you've got to know in the will, if there was a will, does the will say that the executor has the right to sell that property and distribute to the heirs? Or does it go directly to the heirs, and then the heirs are the ones who have to sell? So some of that determines who is supposed to sign this offer to purchase when they get an offer. You're representing the buyer in this case. So as the buyer, you would want to confirm, if you know it's an estate, you want to confirm with this listing agent as to what where they are in that, what stage they are in settling the estate, so that you know how to write the offer. Okay. This is stuff you're going to get, obviously. We talked about it last week, how you write the legal description. You want to put the legal description right here. We don't do plats. You will put a name of a subdivision in here. If it's a condominium, remember the one word that you want to look for in the legal description. The one word is unit. If it's a condominium, it's going to have the word unit in it. Otherwise, it's going to be a townhome and single family home because there's some land involved. We do look for the deed book and page. We do not have anything under the plat book and page. We refer to the deed book and page that will be in your MLS listing under deed reference. There's a string of numbers. And in that string of numbers, you'll have 4 or 5 numbers and a hyphen or dash and some other numbers. The first set of numbers is the deed book. The second set of numbers is the page, the deed book page. So that's what you're going to fill in right here. And again, it will be in your MLS sheet and verify it with your tax records. When you come down here, the purchase price, sometimes you don't put the purchase price in until you've gone through some of this other stuff, but by and large, they've pretty well decided what they're going to offer on that house when you're ready to write the offer. The purchase price right now is not as critical as these next 2 things. Let's say they're going to buy a house that's $400,000 right here. And they're going to have a certain amount that they're going to designate it as due diligence fee. They're going to have a certain amount that's going to be designated as initial earnest money deposit. So let's say there's 400,000 here. They're going to add $10,000 in due diligence fee and they're going to have $20,000 in earnest money. So that 400 minus 10 minus 20, simple arithmetic on this column right here. 400 minus 10 minus 20 is going to be 370,000, I believe, if I'm not miscalculating. Again, this is simple arithmetic. This line has absolutely nothing to do with the loan. Has absolutely, it doesn't have anything to do with down payment. It's just simply stating if this buyer is going to pay anything in advance, then it should be itemized here so that you have the balance. Now, they did change a couple of things in this section. They are allowing electronic transfers now. The electronic transfer was added, I guess, last year for the due diligence fee. What we're running into, unfortunately, is the due diligence fees are so high. Like I just said, $10,000. How many times have we seen them up to 100,000? It has been a scary few months, or maybe over a year, when I think, oh my gosh, we're at $100,000 for due diligence, and I know full well that the purpose of that $100,000, but that was the only way they could get the house, and they were that confident that they were going to buy the house without having any right to terminate. So electronic transfers, you can't do them that high. The only way you can do anything of that value, it's going to have to be wired with, most of the time, to the attorney. If I were representing a seller, I would recommend the seller not giving a buyer who they have the foggiest idea who, they don't know that buyer from Adam's house cat, as they say. I'm not going to give my routing number and my checking number to somebody that I do not know, but I would suggest getting an attorney involved if it's going to be one of those excessively high due diligence fees. If they can get a certified bank check, it should be sent overnight. Do not ever let a buyer, if they're trying to get it to the seller, to put it in the mail. First of all, you don't want to put a check that value in the mail anyway. So you want to advise your buyer that the check is due the effective date, which is the date everything is signed. Well, it's kind of hard to do that sometimes when you're doing it, you're signing electronically. It's kind of hard to get that information or that money to the seller, isn't it? But you work with the other agent and you be very transparent. You better get tracking numbers if anything's sent. Make sure that you have tracking numbers where they can find out where that check is at all times. If they can wire transfer, if the seller has maybe an account that they don't use that much, that they don't mind sending the information, that's acceptable, obviously, because it's listed here. They can even accept a personal check or the official bank check. But look at this little blank right here about the electronic transfer. Come down page 2. If the parties agree that the buyer will pay any fee or deposit described above by electronic or wire transfer, look here, the seller agrees to cooperate in effecting such a transfer, including the establishment of any necessary account and providing any necessary information to the buyer, provided, however, the buyer shall be responsible for any additional costs, if any, associated with such transfer. Sometimes on those wire transfers, there is a cost. And I don't know that it's going to be so significant that a seller is going to require the buyer to pay it, but it is in the contract that it would be a charge that should go to the buyer. Like I said a while ago, you might need to have suggest the seller set up a separate account, an account that's not tied to their personal finances, to receive a sizable due diligence fee. But if they do agree, if the seller signs an agreement, then they are the ones that have to work it out between the buyer and the seller to be able to transfer that money. Let's wait a minute, scooch back up here a minute. This is one of the changes that was made right here. Remember the previous versions, it said the initial earnest money could be delivered at the time of the effective date or within 5 days, and you had to check one or the other. They've eliminated delivery at the time of contract. They're only saying that earnest money is to be transferred or delivered within 5 days of the effective date of the contract. The effective date, you and I know what it is, but sometimes buyers and sellers don't. So if the buyer, if you want to re-emphasize to them what is the effective date, right down here is the definition. That's on page 2. You scooch right down here and point it out to them in black and white, what the effective date is. And that's basically the day that the contract is a contract. It's an offer until everybody has signed it and all changes have been initialed, right? At the time all of this has been signed and has the, and there's the word communicated. See, in North Carolina requires that the communication be involved in being a closing, being a contract. So you might want to make sure that they understand that. So you do not, definitely, you do not want to. I think somebody's getting run out of the room. Come on back when you get in the other room. Bless his heart. So you want to make sure that they understand when it's supposed to be in, where it's supposed to go. I tell you, on that earnest money, I guess for so many years I've been so responsible to get the earnest money. Now within 5 days, they've got to get it to the attorney. And you're thinking, you don't know how irresponsible buyers can be. So you got to stay on top of them. You know, you're going to need to have it put in your phone to remind you, to remind them that that earnest money does need to be deposited with the attorney within 5 days. I'm not having as much trouble, or I don't think y'all are having as much trouble with that as you're having with the due diligence fee. Several of you have had some real issues with the due diligence fee. And somehow buyers are feeling that they are going to do what they want to do before they give the due diligence fee. Well, that is them going into breach of contract if they don't give it, because now they have violated one of the terms. What has come out in some of the what they call Q&A from the legal department of commission, you as the listing agent cannot keep you from making an inspection. The listing agent, the listing agent cannot require the buyer to pay the due diligence fee before they'll change it, the status in MLS. The legal instruction to us is then that would put the buyer in breach. And even though the buyer hasn't paid the DDF, which gives them the right to do some of these things, they're warning that sellers can't keep the buyer from doing what the buyer needs to do, even though they haven't. And I'm thinking, you know, listing agents have had a hard time making sure that the sellers get the money. So there's some discrepancy on that. And if you want me to send you those Q&As, I will do so. Let me know. But for years, if they didn't pay the due diligence fee, they were saying there was nothing we could do. Well, then some listing agents started trying to find a way to incentivize them paying. And now they're indicating that the seller could be. So it can get legally sticky. All right. The bottom line is you want to help your buyer to go ahead and get that escrow in, get that DDF paid. Let's get on with buying this house. Somehow buyers equate whether or not they're going to buy the house by the condition of the property. That's natural, but that's not the most important legal thing for them to be concerned about. It's having a contract and being in breach of contract that they might can get sued for specific performance. All right. So there's a lot of things for you to be aware of in that regard. The escrow agent, look up there, top page 2. Remember that instruction that I mentioned to you a while ago on the professional services disclosure, this is where you're going to write the attorney's name. Now, having said that, if they do not have a choice and they're going to say, well, tell me where to deposit it, you can do so, and do so in a place that's convenient, obviously, for them to do so. And I would highly recommend McNaughton Clemens because it's very convenient and they're very good. If the buyer chooses to change attorneys, they can do that. And on the agreement to amend form, there is a space. In fact, again, that was one of the revisions of that form this year. They can have the earnest money moved from one attorney to another. Hopefully they won't, but occasionally that happens. So just know that if you get to this place and they don't know who to go with and they're nervous about going with who you recommend, know that they can be changed, but give them a recommendation, because in 5 days they got to put money in there. Point out if there's a dispute on earnest money, there in our North Carolina contract, there are some paragraphs that state who gets the earnest money in certain situations. South Carolina, there's not, but North Carolina does have some. But let's say there's a dispute over the earnest money. That dispute typically is we try to negotiate it out before it goes any further. But if we can't get it negotiated out and cannot get agreement, the attorney can turn the money over to the courts, the circuit court, and the buyer and the seller can go to court and let the judge decide. The attorney would have to give them a 90-day warning that that's what's going to happen, and then they can send it. And that's what this paragraph is about here. All right. The effective date, the due diligence fee, all of that it's like a definition is your dictionary. So describing these terms that are used in the contract, and pay a good attention to this right here. The due diligence fee is a negotiated amount, if any. You don't have to have a due diligence fee. Do you know that? According to the contract, you do not have to have it. However, to get a contract accepted these days in the market we're working in, you better have some due diligence fee, and it better be pretty high. But according to the contract, there may not be a due diligence fee. It's an amount, if any, paid by the buyer to the seller for the buyer's right to terminate the contract for any or no reason during the due diligence period. I've said that probably 10 times already, haven't I? You've got to keep reinforcing that is the only right it is for. It is not to determine condition of the house. And the condition of the house may, or maybe the loan that they are getting, maybe that's what is going to help them to know that they can't proceed forward. But they have lost the due diligence fee. I have some agents who say, well, once they write that check, I tell them, kiss it goodbye, because they're not going to see it again unless they see it on the closing statement as a credit back to them, because that's due diligence fee is for that very purpose, for them to pay the seller. And if they don't find anything that they want to get out of the contract for, they'll see it when they close as a credit. You want to make sure that they understand that if they do not pay the due diligence fee, they do not have a right to terminate. See, it's kind of twisting the words a little differently. You're buying the right to terminate for any or no reason. And if you do not pay the due diligence fee, Mr. Buyer, you do not have the right to terminate. You will be expected to fulfill the terms of the contract. And if for whatever reason you do not pay the due diligence fee during the due diligence period, you then are going to lose the earnest money. Because remember, during the due diligence period, if they choose not to terminate and they pass that 5 p.m. date, they've lost the earnest money, right? The earnest money then they could stand, if they don't pay the due diligence fee, and they go past the end date of the due diligence period, they then likely have lost the right for the earnest money. And additionally, that's when they could be sued for the specific performance. Unless the buyer, unless the seller chooses to terminate during that period of time. Now, at the top of this page, there's a paragraph that explains right here. Should the buyer fail to deliver the due diligence fee or any initial earnest money deposit by the due dates, or if for whatever reason, when the check bounces, the seller has a right to send a form. It's form 355. They send that form to you to give to your buyer that demands cash within 1 business day. It demands a means of cash to be delivered within 1 business day. At the end of that 2nd business day, if the buyer still has not paid the due diligence fee and earnest money, if it's to that point, the seller can give the buyer form 352, and the seller can terminate that contract and put the house back on the market. But that does not release the buyer from the obligation of having that money owed to the seller. Again, contractual stuff that people don't want to hear. They want to be able to say, well, I didn't want to pay it, and I chose not to pay it. Had one yesterday said, well, just let him call the attorney. I think, okay, it's okay with me if you want to absorb some legal fees, but right now you're not the one in control. And he said, yeah, I am. I got the money in my bank account. I didn't give that seller. I said, sorry about that, but I don't think you're going to win, but it's your choice. You know, I'm giving you the options. It's your choice. So pay attention to this paragraph here. If you get a buyer who says, well, I'm not paying. I found out things about the house. I didn't want it. That's what due diligence is for. Okay. Anyway, let's scooch on down now. We've beaten that horse about as much as we need to today. Settlement. Settlement is the day you go to the attorney's office and sign all those papers. Most of the time it's loan papers, right? And that is a particular, you're going to choose a day that you're going to go. 30 days, 35 days, 40 days. As soon as you can get the loan together, generally is when you're going to do that settlement. But most of the time you're going to look at 30 days out for a settlement date. Now, in North Carolina, there's 4 things that have to happen for a closing to transpire. For 40 years, I've been calling settlement closing date, and I still have a hard time not calling it closing date. For it to be closed, you have the settlement date, you have a release of funds by the lender, you have one last title review to make sure that there's not been a lien placed on the property that within that 24, 48 hours. And yes, we've had that happen too, that there's no liens. Then it's recorded at the Register of Deeds office in the county where the property is located. When those 4 things have been accomplished, you're closed on the property, okay? And at that time is when you're most likely going to have the keys. Sellers have and listing agents understand that the seller still owns the property until it is the deed is recorded in North Carolina. So they are holding on. A lot of them will hold on to the keys. So you don't go to the settlement table and exchange keys like you used to most of the time. And so you, as representing the buyer, want to make sure before you get to closing is that is the seller going to give keys, or is the seller going to hold the keys until it's recorded? You always want to close in the morning. So if you have you go to settlement in the morning so that they can record the deed early afternoon and you can have the keys by the end of the day. So that's kind of one of the goals that you set out, is make sure that you can close in the morning and not at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because you're not going to get the keys for sure at that time. Special assessments, let's look at that. I told you a while ago, special assessments is one of the things that they put on the due diligence list for buyers. There's 3 different references to special assessments in the contract now. Special assessment is something that the seller must pay before the closing. It's on the closing statement on the CD. If it is a special assessment that has been levied and already invoiced to the seller must pay it, no matter if it's $12,000 or $1,200. That has to be satisfied before you can close on the property. So help the buyer needs to know if there's special assessments and to know the seller does pay for them. Now, what the buyer has got to be concerned with would be anything that might be considered a special assessment in coming months. We used to use the term proposed special assessment. If for whatever reason there was a proposed special assessment, something that had been voted on maybe and didn't pass, or maybe it's just, yeah, the board members are making people aware that they are considering having to raise the monthly fee for an assessment. We don't use the term proposed anymore, but I think I mentioned to you last week, there is a real push right now on something called a material facts. That is now considered a material fact. It is not designated as a proposed assessment. If there is something wrong with the property, which they would then have to probably have an assessment to pay for, that is a material fact about the property. So you as agents are still responsible to learn of material facts about the property by talking to people on the HOA or the property manager and passing that on to your buyer. Fixtures. Oh my goodness gracious, fixtures. Look at all that list of things that people, we looked at this last week, remember, when we looked at it from the seller's perspective. Now we're going to look at it from the buyer's perspective, right? So if you hear your buyer is wanting to maybe have a shed or whatever, make sure that you put that, it is here at my storage shed utility billing. Make sure the seller wants it. Excuse me, the buyer wants it. What if the seller has excluded it in his listing? Maybe that was one of those things they excluded. They said, well, I'm not leaving my storage shed. But you heard the buyer say, oh, I love having that shed, that she shed, love having that. And you go, uh-oh, I guess I better find out if the she shed says, and it should say so in the MLS listing. But if you hear a buyer wants a particular thing, you check it out, okay? We had a situation just recently of someone wanting draperies. The buyers wanted the draperies that went with the rods. Now the rods are required to remain because they're fixtures, right? Just like a mount for the TV, those are fixtures. But the TV is personal property. The draperies are personal property. They are not fixtures just because they hang on a rod that is. Oh my gosh, years ago when those Pottery Barn rods were so popular, would you believe those women would take the rod out and they were saying the bracket is what's fixed to the wall, not the rod. And you know, that's true. The bracket is what's fixed. And the attorney said, no, you buy them as a package. And I had one buyer said, no, you don't. At Pottery Barn, you can buy them separate. And I went, oh my gosh. So we had to negotiate that out. But anyway, every now and then you get into some strange situation. The unpairing and deleting of data. Make sure that the buyer knows that the seller is to put settings back to manufacturing settings. They have a right to their privacy, and the seller better not have any way of getting back in that house. Whether it's on the door, not the doorbell, well, the doorbell, the Ring doorbell, or there's CPI, I think, and I don't know, ADT might too, but some of the security systems have locks on the doors. So make sure when you're checking about security systems, if there's anything that needs to be unpaired there or removed, you know, if the buyer does not want CPI, they like their ADT, then CPI needs to get that accessory out of there. So there's some details that you need to take care of in that situation. But unpairing of data on Alexis and all those different sources, make sure that that's taken care of. Right here is the other items that do not convey. Remember the she shed I said a while ago? If they know that the she shed does not convey and the buyer accepts that, then you list it here that it's not going to convey. Maybe it's something else that wouldn't convey. Maybe it's that inflatable hot tub. The inflatable hot tub is not considered fixtures. It's the stationary hot tub that is a fixture. So just make sure that you have a good understanding and put it in writing. And this is where we make mistakes sometimes on a personal item like the refrigerator. The refrigerator and a washer and dryer are personal items. They are not fixtures. They are not built into, even though some of them are built in, they're considered personal property. Make sure that if it says in the MLS listing that the refrigerator stays, that is not valid until you put it in the offer to purchase that it does stay. Because they offer it to you doesn't mean that it's going to stay unless you say we want it. If you don't say we want it by putting it in the offer to purchase, that seller has a right to sell it the day before to the neighbor. All right. Yes, I've got stories about that too. But nevertheless, remember to list the things that you want in the contract. They're not automatically going to be there. And right here's where you would list that personal property.
Ms. Saber, quick question on that. If the refrigerator is not to convey, the buyers don't want it, they got their own, and at the end, does the seller have to remove the refrigerator? Is that how? Okay.
If you don't have it in there,
right,
there's no responsibility for the buyer to move it. The seller better find something to do with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Makes sense.
Oh gosh, years ago I had an issue with a washer and dryer that was up on the second floor, and the buyer said, I do not want that washer and dryer. I've got my own. And she said, and I am not moving that washer and dryer because if I do, they'll scratch the hardwood floors going down the steps. So help me if that seller didn't leave that washer and dryer. And left town. She finally had to hire somebody and the seller did pay for it. And so help me if they didn't drop that washer going down that and messed up her hardwood floors. After all, it was an omen. She just knew that's what was going to happen. And I can still see that woman, how livid she was. But anyway, notice right here, just what I just said. Any personal property that would be a part of the sale should be identified right here. If it's not, then it better be removed. Okay. This explains a little bit more about the due diligence process. And again, you pull out your little flyer and you can marry the concepts there rather than just doing it verbally. Remember that in North Carolina and South Carolina, basically, we have as-is contracts. The buyer may want a lot of things, but unless the seller agrees to it, they don't have to agree to it. And so if you want to help the buyers to understand that they are selling the house or the property in its current condition, which means as is. Now, that doesn't mean the buyer can't ask for things to be changed, but the seller is under no obligation. Right here, and I think this is a real important part of the contract. Remember I was telling you where they itemized a number of things that the buyer does during the due diligence period. Right here is in the contract. These are the things that your buyer needs to focus on and concentrate on. It's right here written in black and white in the contract that the buyer and the seller have signed. All right. Look here, there's that special assessments I told you. That was added, the special assessments. So make sure that all these things have been reviewed. That should be on your first professional services worksheet so that you know who's going to order what, when. And there's some stuff that you need to be finding out about. You need to find out about the flood hazard. Hopefully this listing agent has given you some information, but if they haven't, you still need to find it out. This is where you find out about the water, septic and well, septic or sewer and well or city water, okay? Another issue just this week on that, quite honestly. Now come on down here. If for whatever reason, the inspector damages the house in some way, it is the buyer's responsibility to fix the house. If the inspector in his normal routine of checking out things, such as the inspectors love to take a screwdriver in softwood, you know, those where it's been water damaged, and they go and squeeze and push that screwdriver in there. He's showing, demonstrating that that wood needs to be replaced. That is not something this buyer does. That is something he is revealed, and that is his standard practice. Okay. But now let's say, oh, was it was a couple of weeks ago, somebody, no, this, oh, this is funny. The inspector asked the agent to hold his ladder while he checks something going into the attic. You know how you have to push up that little there's a board of plywood or whatever, and because there's not fixed stairs or pull down stairs, you have to get a ladder and push up there. Well, he asked the agent to hold it, and would you believe he dropped that piece of board and hit the agent on the head? This is not funny, but it is funny. She said, I don't know if I got a concussion or not, but she said, at least I didn't drop him. He didn't fall off the ladder. And I said, well, we've had people fall through ceilings. I was in a kitchen one day, and the inspector was upstairs, and I was sitting there talking to the buyer while he did his work. And the next thing I know was a leg coming through the ceiling in the kitchen. Oh no, what have we done now? And poor man, I think he broke his leg. I can't remember now exactly what happened to him, but we had to fix the ceiling nevertheless. So it's not funny, but sometimes you kind of have to laugh, you know, because there's some really tough situations that you can get into. This right here, the buyer's right to terminate. Remember, again, we have talked about this before. Provided that the buyer has delivered any agreed upon diligence fee. Highlight that, underline it, circle it. Provided that, these are words they've added, provided that the buyer has delivered any agreed upon due diligence fee, the buyer shall have the right to terminate for any or no reason. One more time, I'm going to say it, right? Okay. This is a paragraph. This is a sentence you want to remember. Closing shall constitute acceptance of the property in its then existing condition, unless provision is otherwise made in writing. If for whatever reason that buyer still has some issues with the condition of the house, it's better that he goes into that 7-day extension and get those things taken care of, or have it in writing that the attorney has drafted something to take care of him after closing, than for him to close. And that's a hard decision, because they got stuff packed and they're ready to move. And yet the same token, you have to explain to them that is their right to make sure that it's right. But if it's more valuable to them to go ahead and move, that's their option too. Okay. The buyer represents, and this was a change in last year's offer to purchase right here, where they can buy with cash. That's where they're going to check right here. If it's a cash sale, if it's not a cash sale, so the board, or this is where they're going to check here if they do get a loan. All right. And if they're going to get a loan, when they, this is the information that they are going to make the seller aware of. It is not contingent upon them getting that financing. South Carolina is contingent upon them getting that exact financing. North Carolina has no contingencies on financing. This is only for the seller to have a confidence that that buyer can or will get a what type of financing. If they're buying a property for $400,000, they could possibly get an FHA loan. They can get a VA loan. They can get a conventional. There are lots of different types of loans. If it goes over 500, they could probably get a VA, but they could not get an FHA. So you've got to know what types of loans a seller is going to know if they can get the type of loan they're trying to get. It's important for the seller to have the confidence that the buyer can buy the house before they sign it, that they agree to sign it, agree to sell it. Let's see. We don't have a contingency for selling a buyer's property someplace else. If they have to sell a house in Michigan before they buy the house here, we do not have a separate contingency addendum. We do have a paragraph in here, and this is it, just a little section right here, where we do need to let the seller know if there's a house to be sold or if there's not. If they have a house to be sold and the buyer can still afford to buy the seller's house, it's not as imperative that the seller know. The important thing is that the buyer knows if he can qualify for both properties. It is not ethically right to say that they don't have a house to sell if they know they cannot buy it without selling. All right. So there's no contingencies. Again, it's making the seller have the right information to make his decision on whether or not to choose this buyer. Take a look at this section and know this would be about selling a house in Michigan or wherever they got to sell a house, or if it's down the street. Look right here. This is the note. This contract is not conditioned upon the sale, lease, or closing of a buyer's other property. If the parties agree to make a contract that would be contingent on sale of another property, an attorney has to draft that. We are not given the right to practice law without a license. And so we have to get an addendum written by an attorney if the buyer wants that. And a lot of them do, because if they're coming in from other states, they're very used to having a contingency addendum. South Carolina has a contingency addendum. Most other states do, but ours was eliminated about 2 or 3 years ago. So just know if they want it to be contingent so that they know they're not obligated to buy that house. If they don't sell the other house, then get an attorney to draft such an addendum. Right down here is a section about the residential property disclosure and the mineral oil and gas. If they got it, you made every effort to put it in their hands before they wrote the offer, then check they received it. If they did not receive it, don't check that they did, because the other agent said, well, I'll get it to you. No, you check what it is at the time you write the offer. If they have not gotten it, make sure you check that they have not gotten it. Here's your buyer obligations again. These are the costs. I think this is one of the other things that they changed in the formatting. These are the things that a buyer can expect to pay. There's a section in here of what the seller can expect to pay at closing. Hopefully you will do some estimates for the seller, as well as the lender is going to do estimates for the buyer on costs. But just go over it with them, spend some time helping them, because not everybody has had the experience. Even if they've done it once or twice, still it helps to go over the costs that they will be incurring at closing. A buyer has many more assorted costs. The seller has maybe 5 or 6 that they would be paying, and they're almost all consistent. But the buyer look at all the things that the buyer has to be responsible for. And again, right there's that title search that we were talking about a while ago. These next sections are things that you're going to get from your MLS listing, because obviously the seller is representing his property. And all of this information should be in the MLS listing. And if you have any questions about it, you might have to call the listing agent. One of the things you might not find, and sometimes you have to track it down, are the rules, what is it, the Owners Association, the Declaration of Restrictive Covenants, the CCRs. Every now and then, they're just not available. And the listing agents will put that listing out there and they don't give you that information. And if you as a buyer or buyer agent try to get it, it's going to cost you money. So you want to make sure that the seller asks for these things, because the seller has a right to them. He's making monthly payments to the association. So he has a right to those documents, and the listing agent should make him aware of that in order to provide them to you. Okay. There may or may not be more than one HOA. There's a lot of these master developments that have a master policy, a master board. Then you have the individual board, like for a condominium. So you may have 2 HOAs. You want to verify that. If you're selling in Baxter or Regent Park or Berkeley, there's a number of them that there's one right over here on Monroe Road, Reflections Point. There's a number of them that would have, again, an overall master policy, and then you're going to have individual boards within it. So find that out. Now, this section right here, the fuel tanks, this is an entirely new section that has been added to this offer to purchase. And I've got to tell you, I don't think I told you earlier, right now, these boxes are not interactive in DocuSign. They're interactive in Dotloop, but they're not interactive with DocuSign. There's something's happened with the check boxes. Okay, I think I did mention that to you earlier. So no, we're working on it, and hopefully it'll be fixed within the day or so. The fuel tank apparently has become a really, really big issue. I haven't seen us have that much issue in our area, but it must become quite an issue in some areas, or they would have made a whole separate section for it. This information right now has not been updated in our MLS sheets. I'm anticipating any day that they will do an input sheet update of the fields that are in MLS. So when you look at the MLS listing, you may or may not have any indication of what the listing says about this. I think we did touch on it maybe a little bit last week on the listing, but this is the contract between the buyer and the seller. This is what the buyer wants to know and needs to know, and the seller needs to be able to convey the knowledge on it. So they're just check marks. Again, you should be able to find out the information from the listing agent. Hopefully it's on the residential property disclosure. Again, may or may not be, because this is more intense details than we've had to use before. Be aware on this paragraph right here where the tanks are included in the sale or not included in the sale. You need to know that one of the changes that they made in this contract is that the contents basically do belong to the buyer. They're not really giving the seller the option to sell right up to the day of closing. It has evidently has become way too cumbersome, because the sellers are required to keep the fuel available for the final walkthrough. And in order to have it available for final walkthrough, there wasn't time to get the fuel provider out there to get the lock on it. And evidently it had just gotten so cumbersome they couldn't work it out. So make sure you read through this, because it is quite a bit of a change than what we have done in the past. Well, we are 3 o'clock. I've talked longer than 3 o'clock. Thank you for giving me these extra minutes. I wish we had another hour, although I don't know if I could talk for another hour, but you could. I know you were thinking that, Robin. I saw that smile. But if you have any specific questions, make sure you've got my email address or my phone number. And we introduced a new new email address yesterday, Tasha Bonnie is our big associate now. And so we have a new email address, and it's kwballantynebic, kwballantynebic, BIC @gmail.com. So when you email that address, one of us is going to answer you, and hopefully you'll have a quicker response to your email. So sometimes there are many for us to get through, and so you can email us to our individual email addresses if you want to, or it's probably going to be better for us all to start working on the kwballantynebic @gmail.com. Love seeing y'all smiling faces, and love having you with me today. I'm sorry we couldn't get all the way to the end. One of the things, can you just give me maybe one more minute? There's a backup contract addendum that I just love. I think I really like that backup addendum. And because a lot of your buyers are so disappointed, and when they don't get the house they want, maybe in the multiple offer situation and they didn't get it, suggest to them that if this is a house they really, really want, at least give it a little while to see if that first buyer falls out for some reason. Yes, not every buyer is following through with the contracts. And so you look at that backup addendum, but do it correctly. On the backup addendum, in paragraph 8, I believe it is, it tells you that the earnest money does have to be deposited with the attorney, just like any other contract. It has to be deposited within 5 days. The due diligence, however, does not have to be delivered to the seller until after the backup buyer is notified that they are in first position. So see, the backup is kind of in limbo until they know if they're in first position. And in that addendum, page 3 is the notice that the seller or listing agent can send over to the buyer's agent that's in that backup position. Then they have 2 days to get the due diligence fee paid to the seller. And what's happening is people are thinking that same period of time is applicable to earnest money and due diligence. Okay, so just watch that. But I would encourage you to be familiar with that backup addendum. And I promise I won't talk anymore. Okay, thank you for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week for the South Carolina listings. Okay,
Thanks, Deborah.
thank you. Good to see you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.